And so we're at the interview portion of the show here on Brookline Interactive Group. And as promised, we've got a great guest. We've got the CEO of your favorite theater, my favorite theater, the Coolidge Corner Theater. And we're going to talk. So stay tuned. Check it out. Katherine Tallman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Tommy. It's so great to talk to you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being on the show. And look, everyone loves the Coolidge. It's a nonprofit community theater. It's like it gives us the arts that even simple folks like me can understand. I try on the fine arts. I do my best, but a good film, I get that, right? And in fact, I got one last weekend. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, just sort of walk us through, just briefly, how did Coolidge Corner Theater get to where it was pre-pandemic, right? I mean, it wasn't there when the town was founded in 1642. How do we end up with the Coolidge?
Well, it wasn't too long after that, really. It was built as a church in 1906. It was built as a Universalist church. And if you are outside the building and look on the outside brick, you'll actually see where the Rosetta Stone or the stained glass window used to be. It took 17 years for the people who wanted to turn it into a theater to get the permission of the town to do that, because they were concerned about corrupting youth and keeping them from being outside. So it finally opened in 1933, and it was quite an elegant time then. People pulled up in their cars all dressed up, and we only had the one theater then. Movie House 1, which you're familiar with, has 440 seats, and Movie House 2 is actually the former balcony. So when the theater was in its grand opening years, it was 1,200 seats and just this beautiful, glorious 1933 Art Deco scene. So then it went through, I mean, I don't know all of the iterations along the way, but certainly ups and downs, like there were ups and downs in the film industry. And then finally in the 1980s, the former owner, the owner at the time, Justin Freed, who was still just a great friend and supporter of the theater, he owned it and tried to operate it as a for-profit. And he just couldn't do it with the advent of the multiplexes. So he had to put it on the market and try to sell it. And a developer came in and bought it and was going to turn it into a retail space. But the community had just rallied around the Coolidge and wanted to try to save it. And they had spoken to a bank and had some arrangement where they would get financing to be able to buy the building. And then because of the 80s, the market really crashed and the bank said, gee, we really can't do this. So after all that effort, and I think about this so much because those people raised all that money and raised all that support before the internet. So there were literally people standing on soapboxes in the park and passing out pamphlets and knocking on doors. And it was a lot more challenging than it is now. Anyway, they ultimately saved the theater. That developer, this is kind of an interesting story, that developer is John Davis, and he actually stepped aside from his transaction to allow for a year of stay for the Historic Society to maybe put a stay of execution. Then Harold Brown came in and bought the building, put it into a charitable trust, and then kept it as a theater. So now we have a 99-year lease with that within that trust, and the Coolidge will be there for a long time. The interesting thing is, so that was like 1989. It was reestablished as a nonprofit. Well, it was really down on its luck. I mean, everything was falling apart, and the reason that Justin had to sell it was because it really wasn't doing well economically. So it was really starting from day one again. And there's some people that were involved, and one in particular, Chobe Hoy, very familiar name to you. She was involved from the beginning. So the Coolidge Corner community, the whole Brookline community came together, saved it then, and then rebuilt it. And over the past 30 plus years, it has now grown into a point where we're kind of exploding at the seams. And ironically, and I'll kind of wander, but ironically, right before COVID, we had just the year before celebrated the 30th anniversary of the saving of the Coolidge, and we had a film made, and everything was just terrific. And then in, like, say, February of 2020, we were planning to launch a public campaign, let people know about the expansion that had been underway for years, and had just had this knockout year in 2019 that further demonstrated how much we needed more space. And then, of course, the friend to all of us came along and changed everybody's plans. But,
So what I hear you saying is even back in the 1920s, Brookline had a slow, deliberative government process.
how absolutely insightful of you. You bet. 17 years, actually, that's not bad. Do you think, I mean, maybe if we put out a parking garage,
Wow.
17
Tough,
years would be fast.
tough sledding. But it in the tough time in the 80s and then once, it became a nonprofit, the Coolidge is now a cultural institution of the town. It's incredibly important. And the thing about movie theaters is, right, they don't sell a product, they sell an experience. And it's an experience shared by dozens or hundreds of people, depending on the screening room at one time, indoors for a few hours at a time, which wasn't especially compatible with COVID, right? And so, thankfully, you're still the CEO of the Coolidge, which means that the organization did something right. Tell us what it was like to get through COVID and sort of where you are now.
Well, it was one wild ride. I think most people had a similar experience, but in this case, where we had a fairly small but important business and a staff of people that was, maybe we had 60 people. It's a very close team. Everybody knows each other. A lot of people have worked there for a long time. So everything was very personal, and we are very personal in the community. So when we first closed down, we closed down on March 13th, 2020. We all lose track of our years, right? Was it 19? Was it 20? We immediately started getting donations from the community. I mean, without any asking or anything, people started sending checks in and saying, this is for the staff. We love you, we miss you, we'll get through this. And of course, at that time, we were all really naive and thought that this was going to be over. And, we look back at it now and we're thinking, what was it that we thought would happen that would make this over? Until we finally realized there would have to be a vaccine. Anyway, during that time, people not only donated generously, they donated repeatedly. And, as head of a nonprofit, you kind of wonder, will people get burnout? Will they stop donating after a while? Our community just kept going and going. And as I was working at home, literally opening the mail, opening the bills, putting the bills in one stack and donations in another stack, and our operating income had gone down 90%, trying to figure out how to close that gap. Those notes and those expressions of how much the Coolidge means to people just kept everybody going.
And so it kept you going until recently when you opened the doors again. And I know that you made some changes to the physical plant to make that work, and you made some changes to the operations. So tell us your thinking on that and where you are now.
Well, one thing we did when we were closed, and we knew we would be closed for a while, we had long planned to do some upgrades of the interior. So replace the carpet, paint, and we just said, this is a really good time to do this. In fact, had we started the construction before COVID, it would have been a great time to build a building, but that just was another timing piece. So we installed a lot of new equipment. We installed a really high-end air filtration system. So we really became more than compliant with COVID, safety measures, so that we were waiting all the time, like ready to for people to come back anytime. And then we could see that wasn't really happening for a while. So then we started doing private rentals of the small theaters, and those went really well. People were comfortable coming back to the theater in their small private, self-designated pods, and then they could see whatever movie they pretty much wanted to see. And we started doing really well with that. I would say really well, it's all relative, but that helped us keep 2 projectionists salaried and on board. So, big challenge for me as head of the organization was furloughing people that I know and care about. And, I know their families, I know what their situations are, and it was really hard to do that. And also to not know when exactly we would ever be able to reopen. So with the regulations the way they were, with social distance requirements, we could only have 60 people in a 440 seat house. So we could have opened sooner, but it didn't make any sense at all to do that. We couldn't sell concessions, and it just didn't make didn't make any financial sense. So as those regulations lightened a bit and we could get in, well, actually what we did, we could see that they were, I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of tripped up here. Once the vaccination was available, then we could see that we were going to open sometime. And so then we started planning for when we could do that. And we decided to start with just the 60 seats and show repertory classic programs and just kind of see how people reacted to it. And those sold out repeatedly. And so then we started doing encores of those. And it was nice to have our staff back and to have our customers back and have people get back in the feel of seeing movies again. You probably know that during the time that we were closed, we established a virtual screening room. So we did start our own kind of streaming. And that we did totally to keep in touch with our customers. There was really no financial reward to that. We grossed in that entire period of showing 175 films. We would gross that much in a good December in the theater. So, but it did really keep us connected to our customers. And it also kept us true to our mission. We could still fulfill all of our programming mission.
Well, and another challenge was there weren't any movies coming out, right? So you also had this timing problem with Hollywood. Not that you only show brand new Hollywood features, but you do show brand new Hollywood features, and there weren't any.
Yeah, it's interesting because there weren't any. You're right on that. From a larger industry perspective, there weren't really any films that we were kind of missing out on, because we're always watching way down the road when films will be released. And so there are films like Wes Anderson has a film coming out in October that we've all been waiting for. When we closed right before COVID, we were trying to figure out how we could possibly fit in Christopher Nolan's film and Wes Anderson's film at the same time in July. Well, needless to say, Christopher Nolan's film Tenet ended up streaming, and Wes Anderson ended up, keeping his film on hold for a while. So when we first did open, we did start with the classic programs, which were always really popular, and I can get back to that. Then we opened In the Heights, and we knew In the Heights would be popular, but we also knew this is the time where we're really going like day and date with the studio. So for streaming, so often there's usually, in the past, there would be a window where a studio would not release a film to streaming until there were so many weeks that would be dedicated to theatrical exhibition. In the case of In the Heights, and as increasingly more the case, they released it to HBO Max the same day as in theater. So you really had to want to see it in a theater. And I think you have seen it in a theater, and you would say that's the way to really see it.
I did. My wife and I went out, and spoiler alert, it's a musical.
And dance. There's a lot of dance in there.
There is dancing as well, singing and dancing, corrupting America's youth since the 1930s. I think that's the Coolidge's motto, right?
Yeah, we try art house cinema. So what we're still so early on. I mean, literally, we opened again May 13th to show any films, and we're only the early part of July. We opened our first feature film June 13th. So we're really new in the experience, and so are all of our colleagues. And what we're hearing from our colleague theaters across the country is they're having the same experience. A new film will come in, it will draw a crowd for a while, but not enough. And so then it's slow. We're all trying to figure out which theater to put which film in and which film to open. And we're really focused again now too on bringing in a lot more classic programming as we figure out the balance and until people get more comfortable coming back. I think our patrons are comfortable to a degree, but we clearly don't have the really big population to draw from that you usually need to have a sold out house repeatedly.
Well, I want to transition a little bit here. You had said earlier that in 2018 and 2019, things were really humming. You were, doing really well, bursting at the seams. And when you're bursting at the seams, you either open up a second theater down the street, or you just make your theater bigger. What's the Coolidge going to do? Tell me about that.
We are going to make the theater bigger. And of course, everybody says, where are you going to do that? There's really no room to do that. And then I have to say, well, if you look at the back of the theater, there's actually quite a bit of room between the wall and the parking lot. And so we are literally going to build on that back wall. That current back wall will become the back wall of our new concession area, of our new lobby. So we'll start with that. We'll build out up to where the parking starts. The parking will be pushed out a bit. And then we got air rights from the town of Brookline so that we could build the second and third stories higher and cantilever over. So we would get more space on the second and third floors.
And fun fact, because those air rights are a long-term lease, which is sensible, it required an act of the state legislature several years ago. It was before my time.
That's right.
My predecessor, Representative Smizik, helped take care of that because it's a nonprofit. It's a community theater. It makes sense for the town of Brookline to be willing to share some of its space. But the state says if towns, cities, and towns can't do that without their permission on a long-term lease. And the town had done it for the Brookline Arts Center and now has done it for the Coolidge Corner Theater. So, you know, our lives intersect a little bit. That's not cheap, blowing out the back of a theater and a second and a third floor. And I mean, you just raise the price of popcorn $1. How's that going to work?
It was a whole lot cheaper about 2 years ago than it is now. I mean, literally construction costs went up about $1.5 million in the last 9 months. So that was pretty scary. But yes, it is not cheap. And we have been blessed with a lot of support during the quiet phase of the campaign when we were raising major gifts. So we've raised 85% of the money that we need to build the theater. The cost of the theater and the cost of the running everything is about $11.5 million. And so we're very far along in that process. And we're, you know, really confident that the public part of the campaign, which is generally smaller gifts, will really come through. And that's actually one of the silver linings of COVID is we saw so much support that we know that support will be there going forward. And we also saw so many new donors that we can you know, go to now as well.
And so you're lovely and subtle about it. I'm not. The Coolidge Corner Theater needs donations from viewers like you to complete the expansion so that there's a lobby and you can wait indoors to get your tickets, even when it's raining. So there's more screens, so there's more concession room, so there's a community space, which doesn't even need to be used for discussing films, but for other purposes that the community could benefit from in Coolidge Corner. Am I right or am I right?
You are right, and it is really exciting. There's so much that we want to do. What's funny is that now that we're back, and you talked about like there not being a whole lot of film product. Actually, we're back in the same problem that we had before COVID and before we closed. There's more film than we have room for. So we only have 4 theaters, 2 are very small. So now we have this list of films and we're just playing, which is what we've done every Monday for years. Every Monday we play, move things around, and how will we possibly fit everything in here? So we'll be so excited to have those 2 new screens. And that education center, I think, will just be fantastic. It will give us so much breathing room and so much opportunity to expand on the educational component of our mission.
Speaking of breathing room, you know what's gotten really popular over the last year and a half? Hanging out with friends outdoors. Anything like that going on at the Coolidge?
Are we going to get into that pirate movie discussion? Because yes, this weekend at Medfield State Hospital, we're doing shows of Goonies Friday night and Saturday night. We recently had 2 sold out shows at Medfield State of Shutter Island, which was filmed there. And we had also had sold out shows last year. The thing that's nice this year with the drive-in component, last year people had to stay in their cars and they couldn't really enjoy the grounds out there. Now people can get there early. The grounds are absolutely gorgeous. People can picnic and they can bring their dogs and their kids and they can actually really have a great time and then sit down and see a movie. So we're doing that. We'll always do our Rocky Woods shows, our horror shows that we do about 3 or 4 times a year. We're not doing this year the Mount Auburn cemetery shows, but we hope to reinvigorate those next year.
You mentioned Goonies. It may well be my favorite pirate film. I'm wearing actually a pirate tie today. My daughter picked it out.
I had a
Uh,
feeling that was a child involved.
tell us, five great pirate films since you brought it up. I'll give you Goonies. That's one.
Well, of course, great is all a matter of personal perception, right? So I would have to say, I personally have not seen Goonies, but I was happy to bring it up because we do have some tickets left for this weekend. So go online and you can find them there. A couple of interesting, so two Captain films, and neither of which are Captain Hook. One would be Captain Blood, which introduced Errol Flynn to Hollywood and to the world. That was on one end, 1935. And then a more recent one that people are familiar with is Captain Phillips, which was a little kind of close to home because it was based on a real hijacking by Somali pirates of a Denmark-based, I guess freighter. So the two Captain movies there, Goonies, certainly Pirates of the Caribbean. I personally, having grown up in this, and I'm older than you are, Mary Martin and Peter Pan, which we would watch on television. It was made for TV, and that was pretty special. So that's a big part of, piece of my pirate lore. And then my favorite pirate movie has to be, and I know this is shared by a lot of people, is Princess Bride, which we can never see enough, right?
So I'm going to say Goonies. If you haven't seen it, you should. I will say, as a person who sort of was young when Goonies came out and watched it as a little kid, I saw it as an adult. It doesn't hold up as an adult. You watch it and you're like, that's not that good. But as a kid, it's amazing. It was a great movie. I will say, maybe my favorite pirate movie, Baseball's Last Hero. It's about Roberto Clemente, who, of course, played for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Oh my gosh, I'm not familiar with that.
Roberto Clemente was
I know
an
Roberto
incredible
Clemente.
humanitarian, died tragically. Worth learning about him. Great documentary, great stories. But film does so much for us in so many different ways. And I don't even want to get into it because, people get PhDs in this kind of stuff, right? My friend, the late Stanley Cavell, right, was a great Harvard philosopher who philosophized about film and really understood the importance of film as an art. And I'm an amateur. I just watch movies and I enjoy them, and I try not to learn too much about cinematography or directing or anything, because then I have a hard time following the story. I just like a good movie. When are we going to start building this expanded Coolidge Corner Theater?
Well, funny you should ask, because the select board last night just unanimously stamped our last need for approval on some kind of details to wrap up to get us to the building permit stage. So we will be breaking ground within the next couple of weeks, which is, it's funny because it seems it has been such a long time coming, and now it's here. So if you come in the theater, the next time you'll see this big giant box, which is now where all the kegs and the candy are going to be, because those closets are going to be going away as part of the new construction. So it's going to start soon, and it will be finished by sometime next summer, and we'll all just be enjoying even more of the Coolidge than we've had before. One thing I have to say, when you talk about community, I always would describe the Coolidge as more than a building, and that became so apparent during COVID. I mean, there was no building there, but that community never went away. I mean, it was just like everybody was still as tight as they ever were. And I don't think you could say that about that many places. It's everybody owns it. Everybody has part of it. Everybody loves it. I feel like I'm just kind of a caretaker of this special place for a while, but everybody's got their arms around it. And it's really a joy to do that.
Well, Katherine, you're clearly taking great care of such an important cultural institution. And I know the viewers at Brookline Interactive Group are grateful for the work that you've been doing through really challenging times. We're going to keep coming to movies. We're going to come to them during construction because you're still open. And I know you're going to promise that there's not going to be jackhammering in the middle of the movie. So we're going to keep coming to movies over the next year. And then you say a year from now, right? Construction schedules don't always follow the rules of the boss.
You start out hopeful, right? Even at home.
We're hopeful. But before we know it, there'll be 2 more screens with top quality sound and seating. And even on a December night, which is, I know, a great month for film, you won't have to wait necessarily outside in the cold in line. It's going to be wonderful. Lots of exciting days ahead for the Coolidge. So Katherine, thank you for coming on the show and for sharing some of the Coolidge's past, present, and future.
And thank you, Tommy. And thanks so much for your support on every level.
Hey, it's an easy institution to be supportive of. So viewers, we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.